be my own clap squad. Whoever started clapping, I love you. Unabashed. Okay, so the internet's a little bit spotty here, so I've brought all my videos down, so there'll be a bit of movement around my slides, so don't panic. And I'm gonna weave a couple things together. I'm one of those speakers who has easily 15 hours of content. I've been thinking, what is it I wanna share? So it's from a couple places. So I'm Phoenix Perry. If you wanna find me on the internet, I'm literally Phoenix Perry all over the internet. So on Twitter at Phoenix Perry, Phoenix at phoenixperry.com, very easy to find. So feel free to contact me. There's no Q&A after this, and I'm gonna put out some salacious big ideas as I do, and you can find me after. Cool, so let's kick that off. So we're gonna start with things that I think about when I'm moving and skating. So during the pandemic, I really was in a weird place. And maybe some of you found yourself in this situation. What does an installation and games play interactive artist do during the middle of a national lockdown? And I really had to find myself again and find a way to find community and interaction and connectivity without technology. So I took up a hobby of mine that had been a hobby until I was about 18. I started skating. So during this period, I really rediscovered a lot of things in my head. I had space to think. And you know, I really started to put together some big ideas. And one of the things that I really noticed was that maybe it wasn't all okay anymore. Maybe there were things up in my head that I'd been thinking about that weren't giving me a lot of confidence. So this talk is gonna be about some of those things. And many of us here in this room, so all the images you're gonna see are generated via a VQ GAN. So it's clip hooked up to a VQ GAN, and if anyone in here knows what that is, you basically give this visual algorithm a text prompt. And in this case, I kind of wrote poetry just to see what the data sets in the algorithm would spit back to me. So I started by asking, what are we making? And I'm like, no, let's stop and think about the future. Where are we going with all this? Where's all this new technology around machine learning gonna take us? How about in the moment right now? So if we query the GAN and ask it, who's running the world? This is what we get, right? We get a very predictable, unresolved image, and this is not great. Like, I don't like this. Like, this is not a reality I want to live in, right? And I'm going to be asking you guys a lot of questions around what we make and where we'd want to live in the future. And I think this is showing some biases in the data set. So what I'm seeing is that capitalism in our society and in games and in interactive systems, and we're seeing it a lot in our space right now with NFTs and monetization and Ponzi pyramid schemes coming out of our ears, that capitalism is a core rot. Right? It's rotting away a lot of our work. And a lot of us have been introducing grind loops and interactivity into our creative work that we know is maybe potentially not exactly the best thing in the world. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So, you know, what is the vision? What is the end game of capitalism? Where is it taking us? And I think it's taking us to a future where a few people have all the assets and everybody else is living, come on in, come sit down, it's okay, come sit down, come on. Where everyone is living in a kind of world where there's no humanity anymore, you know? So if you put, what does the future look like? This is what we get, right? And this is this really dystopian image where there are no, but what is one thing that we don't see in this image? Anybody shout out one thing that we don't see? Nature. We see no trees. We see no nature. Is this a future you want your children to grow up in? Because this is the data set that's existing behind a lot of GAN stuff, a lot of VQ GAN stuff, and a lot of OpenAI stuff, and this is where it thinks we're going, right? I don't want to live here. No plants and no images. It's this kind of robot world. And ask yourself, who profits from this? Who wins in this scenario, right? It's Elon Musk plugging us all into the matrix to slave away for the rest of our lives, right? This is not a world we want to live in. And I kind of really look at what we're doing. So if you ask what colonization and colonialism looks like in this GAN, you get this. And I think that this image says to us a lot about the history of where we got to. We started here. This is where we began this massive capitalist project to extract resources and redistribute them to the wealthy, right? This is the most crude form of it. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the relationship to capitalism and colonialism? And particularly, we're beginning to see that play out in our technology. So communism isn't immune from this, right? It's absolutely not immune from this kind of capitalistic thinking. China's a really good example of this. So what are different forms of economy that we could begin to think about? Like, we're designers, we're artists, we bring forward economies, and economies of idea, they're made of ideas first. So if we ask ourselves, what are the ideas we could begin to really think about? I think indigenous culture has some really great ideas around trade that we could go back and explore. So this is a potlatch. This is a potlatch, rather. It is a gift economy. Now, you think that gift economy is like when you get a gift, right? No, that is not what these kinds of gifting economies are based on. They're based on this idea of circularity, where every village gives something to another village that they have a surplus of. And this kind of gifting forms a very sustainable, survivable economy. It is so salacious in the face of capitalism, it is criminal up the Northwestern Americas. And that tells you something. When like a capitalist system makes a form of trade illegal, that might be a good indicator that that's a good place to start, right? So this culture is one of mutual care, and it's born out of respect. And this idea of care is something I want to come back to. These folks are caring for each other, they're caring for their ecologies. And it's from the indigenous people, this idea is from the indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest coast, and it runs through the Americans, so Canada and the United States, for whom it was traditionally the primary government institution, legislative body, and economic system. An idea of generosity, not shortage, right? So what do we do when we mine crypto? We're playing into an economy which eventually has shortage built into the system. And a lot of our economic ideas are based on scarcity. What happens if we base our ideas of economy on abundance? So let's shift the paradigm. Let's shift these worldviews and try and design worlds where we think we could make better ways of living possible. This is this really amazing book. And the first time I read this book, my mind kind of rocked. It's part of a five-part series called Kinship, Belonging in World Relations. And this is volume 1, Planet. And there's an essay in it, and it's like a speculative futurist essay. And when I started reading it, I was like, what is this hogwash? And by the time I got to the end of it, my entire perspective on what space travel was really shifted. It was an adamant, serious case against not colonizing the moon. And I was like, whoa, what are they on about? And they're like, we need to protect the moon for future generations. We need to make sure the moon is still here. We can't go in and strip mine it. And this idea of not colonizing the moon, the fact that it was a thought exercise brings you to Mars, right? And it starts asking you, what are we doing in these colonial projects of colonizing other planets? What happens when we export that form of capitalism to another, well, the moon's not a planet, it's a moon, but to moons and planets, correct? Or asteroids. So we can't start colonizing other worlds before we fix the problems we have, or we're just going to continue to extract. So I really recommend this book to folks who are looking at ways that they can think about goals. Do our interactive systems like games still need goals? Do we need goals in our interactive work? Do we need an aim, an objective? Or is it okay just to let people explore, right? Just to let people be in a space together. And I've been really interested in the way that a lot of interactive games and systems have removed goals, particularly during the pandemic. You had little micro goals, but there was no overarching goal of playing Animal Crossing, right? You're not trying to get anywhere. You might just want to beautify your house. We talk about capitalism inside Animal Crossing, that's another conversation. But you get the idea that during the pandemic, this idea of improving one's little world felt incredibly powerful, right? So think about what we can contribute instead. Goals are not aims, and I want to see us go for interesting. Where have we not been before? So this is a really interesting idea from robotics, and it's in a book called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned by Stanley and Latham. Has anyone here run across this book? This book is a really fascinating book on machine learning and robotics. So if you're into that kind of thing, you might check this out. So in this book, there's a study that has two different forms of robotics. One where a robot has, been told to go to a goal, right? And the other one where the robot has been told to explore novel pathways. They're both trying to exit a room. Both robots are trying to get out of a room. That's the idea here that they're judging them against in a metric. The robot that was told, don't repeat yourself, explore novel pathways, outperformed the robot that was trying to get to the goal every single time. So this idea of exploring new avenues, right, and building our knowledge on what we're exploring in our world is actually really, really effective. Computationally, it's more effective. In robotics, it's more effective. And I think it's more effective in our lives and in our society, potentially. So if you create and design constraints, I think that that's a more interesting idea, right? So we have this idea of designing the constraint of you can't repeat yourself. That's a constraint. It's not a goal. So could we look at negative negative objectives in the form of limitations? What are the limits on what our players, and in you all's case, gallery goers, what could they be asked to do? What are their limitations? Did anyone here see the blast theory talk yesterday, which was excellent? Blast theory has a really good habit of doing this, of exploring through limitation what is possible. Right? So what about this is an idea here. What about limiting how we make technology that damages the planet? Right? Could we do that? Could we begin to degrow or scale down our technology? Do we always need more computational power, faster, bigger, better, more? Because who benefits in that world, right? So I really think there's a lot of value that we overlook in adult play. And I'm looking for play as a resource to reawaken some of this thinking in our culture, right? So during the pandemic, did anyone try and buy a guitar? Those of you who are laughing, no. Musical instruments, art supplies, rollerblades, roller skates, skateboards, all sold out everywhere, right? And the reason for that is play is a way that we survive. It is a way that we live in our world, and we need to have more value on it. This is an image that was generated through playful systems. So I just threw that in as a prompt, and I got this wonderful image. It gave me a lot of hope, because it had like little hints of technology inside of it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. It still sees a system as a computer, but then it recognizes this idea to play. So I'm interested in that. So I'm really interested in the way that we are surviving trauma through play. And I think in our culture right now, as creators, right, as creators of stories, of interactive fiction, as VR creators, as creators of sound and media, what we're trying to do is figure out how to bring our species forward, right? How to craft survival into what we do. So during moments of trauma, in particular, play is a survival mechanism. And that's what I put in to get this image. So how we play to get through the hard stuff, like a global pandemic. Or, in my case, I throw myself into music anytime I have a personal trauma, like a death in my family. Some of you here may do that. So it's like thinking how we can generate play and novel experiences in our environment. So I want to look for new ways to flex and push at our world. During the pandemic, we were in this kind of liminal space where people were between, jobs, some cases life and death, family and isolation. And it was one of the only places where we were still allowed outside, right? It was places of play, places like parks. That's where we were allowed to still go. And I think that that's really interesting to think about as a space for projects and provocations. So there's this new idea kind of coming out in human-computer interaction research that is connected to quantum physics. Who here has heard about the idea of entanglement, right? So entanglement is this like overarching idea that two particles, no matter how far apart they are, will have related states, right? So they're entangled. The information in them is connected. We're not exactly sure how, but we know it's connected, right? And that's where all the Nobel Prizes and interesting work in physics is right now. But writers in the humanities have taken this idea into human-computer interaction, and they've crafted this idea called entangled HCI, which I think is incredibly interesting. Chris Frauben, I'm going to try and say this, Frauberg? Let's give it a go. Sure, why not? His paper on entanglements in HCI was a really fascinating read to me because he put forward the idea that we're entangled with our technology, that we're no longer separated from it. It doesn't exist outside of us anymore, right? We're wrapped into it, and I can't take away the tools you use anymore and leave you. Who here remembers the shift in how they thought? Some of us are old enough, some of us weren't born yet. And for all of those who were born after this point, everything that I'm gonna say is now normal. Because if it's in the world when you're born, right, it's normal. Who remembers stopping being able to remember huge chunks of information and starting to be able to recall where to go find it, right? That was a shift in our cognition. And these shifts, these like titanic level shifts happen in our cognition when we bring in new tools. The new tool I'm referencing is obviously a search engine, right? So we brought in a search engine and all of a sudden how I was accessing information changed. From my own head, where I needed to have a lot of computational power, that's a bad analogy, the brain is not a computer, but a lot of space in my brain reserved for remembering things, became, oh, go to Google, go to this website, go to the third page in and you'll find it, Or, oh, isn't it connected to that image and that other author? What a weird shift, right? So we start shifting how we're able to hold on to information, and that begins to shift how we think. So now these grind loops that come from games that have been introduced into your social media, into your feeds, and into your everyday life, they're shifting your cognition. They're shifting your ability to exist and be in the world. There's a lot of scientific research for this. Anyone who wants more on it, come find me. I have a PhD that's getting finished right now. I can send you pages. So if you type into this VQGAN, we are entangled with our technology, it gives you this, which actually I thought was really beautiful. This idea of our bodies becoming one with these sort of tree structures, which are like our technology, but also it's fairly dysmorphic because they're in like it looks like a world post-nature, right? It's a very interesting image. I really find these large data sets interesting for mining out what the subconscious is that we fed into them with all of our images. Everyone in here has an image in one of these data sets, I guarantee you. We don't consent, right? We don't agree to that. It's buried somewhere down in the terms of service that they can sell our stuff and we don't own it anymore. But this is the end game of that. Cool. So this is my skate park, back to skating. And recently I've been thinking about how I'm entangled with the geometry here. How am I entangled with my skates and this geometry? And I'm really obsessed with this tree right here, totally in love with it. And it's because the arch, you can't really see it in this image here, but when you're in the bowl over here, you come up and you see the arc of the tree, and it completes the line of the skate bowl, which is really beautiful. Gives you something really clear to focus on if you're trying to transition up on the coping or the deck. And what I love about that is clearly the tree has grown into the space of the skate park somehow. This is the side that faces the road. It's like this, right? And then this is the side that faces the park. And I think there's something really elegant with this entanglement this tree obviously has with this park, right? How our nature is embedded in our geometry and our architecture, and then that changes how we move our bodies in space. I find it incredibly amazing. So how do we critically reflect on our place as designers and creators in all of this? If we are entangling people into new cognitive spaces, what is our responsibility, right? So this is a wonderful image. I threw into this Donna Haraway's idea of oh my God, I'm forgetting it. Her crazy octopus ideas. Anyone here knows Haraway, they know what I'm talking about. Her Cthulhu scene. I typed in the future of Cthulhu scene, and I got this. So I think that's interesting. So what I'm really interested in is creating systems of care with nature now. So I got this image by asking what a jackdaw dreams. And I found out Europeans, they'll never actually come up to you unless you've really violated a social rule. But feeding pigeons, crows, and ravens, and jackdaws, and magpies will get people's attention, and they have strong opinions about this. So here's a jackdaw, and I was feeding these jackdaws at a restaurant, and this one jackdaw is very precocious and very smart. These critters are incredibly intelligent, mostly more intelligent than most kids under 5. And starts getting like closer and closer to me, closer and closer. And at one point, this jackdaw takes my whole sandwich. I'm like, I should have seen this coming. You know, and I was just like, what does this jackdaw dream about? So I asked this system, and this is what I got as a jackdaw dream. And I just thought that was so poetic. I thought I'd share it. Okay, so I'm asking now a sensitive question. So if anybody, I'm gonna show some really sensitive images, trigger warning for folks in the room who get freaked out by body horror. I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to walk out. Is that cool? Go ahead and leave, it's fine. I won't judge you, I'll close my eyes. All right, if you're in here, I'm assuming you can take some body horror stuff. Okay, so I wanna ask, are we creating trauma or are we healing with the systems and the pieces of work we make? Are we creating spaces which are generative or destructive? So I want us to really watch out for creating, this is the image that came up when I typed in intergenerational trauma, right? I got this, and I think this is very telling. We ended up with a bunch of white people who look like they're from a bad shack in Alabama, right? Love Alabama, so no slight on Alabama there. But it's this rule of it's this myth of rural poverty that's coming through, I feel like, in this. So if you think about what I mean by this, sending trauma through generations through the things we make, who here in this room has a parent or a grandparent who survived World War II and was either a soldier or in a horrible situation or had to flee? I'd say that's probably about half the room, if not more, right? And they're traumatized by that. Anyone who has a grandparent who survived the Holocaust knows what that feels like, right? I don't, but I have friends that do, and my grandfather was a soldier, so he had other trauma. But you ask yourself, what am I holding on to? And I think to myself, every time somebody makes a shooter in a game, are they perpetuating that cycle of intergenerational horror? What's it gotta be like for someone who was a soldier or had family in the military to walk in and see their kids just randomly shooting up Fallujah, right? Which was a real game that came out, by the way. We have to ask ourselves, is that propagating harm, right? And who is benefiting from propagating that harm? I think a lot of the violent media we create is propagating trauma and not giving us space to heal from it. I think it's really dangerous, and we need to look out for that as creators. And then, I think it's this kind of, I make a joke, but it's settler colonialism death grip. It's grinding down on all of us day in and day out. And we really need reforms in the kinds of games and media you're making. And so I want to take a question here and put it to you all. Would you live in the world of the things you create? Would you want to live there for the rest of your life? Right? And if not, why? Right? I think it's a really powerful question to start to ask content creators. Are we happy with the worlds we're putting forward? Okay, so this is a more optimistic image. And I typed it in by saying, how can our games open these new spaces of play, care, and wonder, Leonora Carrington. So if anyone knows this artist, you can see her work evidenced here. And I just like this idea of a circle and a loop. I think there's a lot to this idea of hoops and circularity and gifting, going back to what I was talking about earlier, circular economies and the ways that we can move value through our economic structures, which are not extractive, right? They're not pyramid, they're circular. Everything comes back around, great? So this is an artist that I really love called Irene Tokini Fubara. This is a project of hers on moving her body through a space. And she's attempting to decolonize games right now. I think she's an academic of a generation, or sorry, they are an academic of a generation. New pronouns, I have to get with it. And they have been really interrogating this work in the interactive digital media they've been creating. They've been making these big immersive spaces where you have to do things like cross borders as a Nigerian woman with a Nigerian passport, or a Nigerian character as the passport. So here you will see the passport, and they've put buttons on the passport, which I think is really interesting. And having had to try and travel with Irene a few times, I know how hard it is for them to get visas, right? And how these systems are moving through our bodies, right? And everyone here who came through security, what does that look like? What's the loop we're creating there? How are we reinforcing structures of power? So I want to ask ourselves how we're replicating this. So this is a really amazing piece that Adele Lynn made, which was a Black Lives Matter protest inside Animal Crossing. For those of us who couldn't go outside and join the real protests because we have health concerns, or we might be pregnant or caring for people, this was a medium in which protest found a place in games, right? And it's just this idea to go and protest what happened to George Floyd inside of a game space. And for that to make The Guardian, like it made the Times, it was a significant movement. And I was like, wow, this is incredible, right? How do we co-opt the spaces that we're in? So I often think about how our bodies hold on to trauma. So if you experience traumatizing media or traumatizing content, you hold on to that, right? And you take it into the next thing you make. And I really am concerned about the trauma that's stacking up inside of us as we move through the media spaces that we're occupying right now. So at every moment in our lives, we're making these choices and we're experiencing these worlds, and we're storing that information in our physical selves. And how do we create points of resistance to this? So during the pandemic, I got really into drawing. I'm bad at it, but I love it. So I started drawing all these really whimsical things, like what's going on here? Who knows? Who cares? But I really think it's important to spend time in nature and spend time outside, or spend time drawing, or spend time generating images of nature, because we need these, right? There's room here. There's room in this image for us to move in and unpack ourselves. And what I love about this is that the person in this image is not alone. And if I think we all begin to do this and ask these questions very seriously, we start to see a more generative future, right? So if you ask this clip VQ GAN hookup scenario to give you, and I'm going to skip through some of this, images of a sustainable future, you get this, right? It's a really powerful, better image of where our future could go. Awesome. And I think if we all do this together and we see play as a space of giving and care for how we proceed in the world, and we can kind of resist some of the structures we're running into, just maybe, and if you type in, everything's gonna be all right, you get this. So that made me very happy. I love this image. Everything's gonna be all right, I think. All right, awesome. Some of you are off to another talk. Cool, that's fair. It's a good time because, yeah, they're like, this bad. Okay, now is the unabashed plugging section of my presentation. So I just released this. If you use Unreal or Unity, particularly if you use Unreal, I've made an interactive machine learning plugin. Let me tell you what it does. So it lets you use your body in spaces in new ways. I'm going to show a demo video of it here really quick. You can download it. It's free. Open source. Please contribute.
This is our InteractML regression demo. Here we see panels showing the information about the data being recorded. In this case, the player position is our input values. The training panel shows the training status, and the run panel is the output of the running model. As the player moves around, you can see the input values changing based on the position. If we run the model, we can see the output. As we move from left to right, goes between 0 and 1. This model is currently trained on 1 being down the right-hand side of the map and 0 being down the left-hand side of the map. We also have the output value visualized as a material parameter change on the sphere at the back of the map. If we stop the model running and delete the current examples, we can record a new set. Initially, with the expected output 1, we record some positions at the front of the map, setting the expected output to 0 and recording a load of examples around the outside of the map. This is our example data set which we train the model on. And once again, when we run, we can see the output blending between 1 at the front of the map and 0 at the periphery.
And this works in real time in any running game. Oh, there's more. I'm not done.
Here we have our dynamic time warp demo. This is pre-trained on over 70 example numbers. And as we can see, a series of input values generated by a gesture drawn on the input panel. The model is run on this input data and matched against the trained examples. We even train for multiple stroke configurations present in variants of standard numbers.
Okay, so this is the semaphore test environment, which is
Bruno
actually
from
to
Gibson
teach
Martelli.
you how to do semaphore, and we've just started developing this. So there's you can see there's a mirror that's in front of me, which has the semaphore flag positions. I've got my semaphore flags in my hand, and on the left there's like a little tile, and the tile gives me the output. So this machine learning system has been trained with all the letters, so I'm hoping that I can actually spell out words and things like that. So I'm just going to start with the alphabet, and I'm just going to run the system now. So it's going to give me A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and then Q, and then R, S. So if I go to a space, I should be able to spell epic. E, let's see, P, I, it's quite challenging, C. Okay.
Great, that's InteractML. So why am I able to do this so fast? Does anyone have any thoughts? Small data sets. I'm not sending any of the machine learning to some giant system to mine. Users' data is on their own device. They have consent and control over it. And what else can I do with this? Any body, any configuration, right? There's no ableism baked into this. I don't assume your body is a specific shape or can do a specific thing. Users can train it on their own ability levels, right? So access and small data are built into the core models of this project. That's InteractML. If you want to use it, I need users. We have 50,000 now, but I'm greedy. Okay, awesome. So that's InteractML. I've got 5 more minutes, and I am going to show you my new installation called Forest Daydream. This is a project I made in collaboration with UAL. I'm going to skip around the video because I don't have a lot of time. So this is Forest Daydream. We play as creatures in this world. We play to test our limits. We play to see how things fit. We often experiment in play and try things out in play that we wouldn't feel safe doing if the context was removed.
It's really an attitude with which you engage in the world. By playing, you can create something new, or you experience something that you didn't expect.
Hello, I am Phoenix Ferry, and I'm the course leader here on the Creative Computing degree at the Creative Computing Institute. This is a project called Forest Daydream, which is the 3rd iteration of a project that I've been working on for several years with many different collaborators. It is a long-term research agenda that I've had to look at social play in groups and collaboration in groups. So the project itself involves a couple of pieces. There is a small forest, which looks like a low poly video game forest, and a small hut, which looks like a low poly video game hut. My thinking behind that is that we spend a lot of time in virtual natural environments when we live in cities. So pulling where we actually end up going back out into the real world and looking at it as an object. So that's why it looks the way it does and the kind of architecture it has. Beyond that, each piece is interactive, and then there are games which play out amongst the pieces, and they require multiple people to play. So something will be happening over here, and then you'll need a response to it over here. So there's no way to play it on your own, so you have to ask for help and ask for cooperation, which is one of the underlying philosophical points I'm trying to make in the game, is that you can't do things on your own, you need to do them in groups. We have this class here that I'm leading right now on environmental computing and spatial computing.
So these really create
immersive sound. Role in Forest Daydream, it was almost like a sound supervisor role to create an immersive soundscapes which evoke the rainforest, and also music composition. Los Casinos is an ongoing project with the Wampi, the indigenous community who live near the Ecuadorian border of the Amazonas rainforest. I spent some time with them 2 years ago and developed an ongoing relationship as an artist to help with their government, to help deforestation and indigenous land rights. The sound recordings, the soundscapes are very immersive, as again a hyper-reality, to try and aim to trigger this emotional feeling, this primal feeling of interconnectivity with nature. I hope it stimulates audience members to ask themselves questions of their own role within the social ecological system.
Awesome. And a Forest Daydream. All right, I'm over time by 22 seconds. Thanks for coming.